Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of the organizing committee, I'm honored and delighted to welcome you to this event. My name is Michael Eibach and I'm your moderator. I wish to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today. We are so excited that you are participating in this official launch of the United Nations Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities, UNITAC-Hamburg. UNITAC will unite a team of experts in technology, innovation and urbanization. Through prototyping and applied research methodologies, they will develop solutions towards accelerating the sustainable development goals associated with cities and urbanization. Today, we hear from partners and stakeholders of UNITAC, including HafenCity University, UN-Habitat, the United Nations Office of Information and Communications Technology, the Government of Germany, as well as distinguished thought leaders and practitioners. We are deeply grateful for their commitment. Today's launch marks a high point in our common cause to establish UNITAC. I hope that you all enjoy the exciting speakers to come and that today inspires ideas and discussions around the ways that we can make our cities a better place. We encourage all of you to participate using the chat function. There will be time to address some of your comments. In addition, we will share a link for you to contact us offline at a later stage. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Please welcome Mr. Niels Annen, Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany. We are delighted that you are joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mr. Eibach, dear First Mayor Tschentscher, dear Ms. Kiesop, dear Mr. Kerry, Ms. Egerland, Mr. Peterse, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for Germany, and if I may say so, for my hometown, Hamburg, and for me to host the United Nations Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities. You know how much I would have preferred to meet you in person and meet you all in the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg. This inauguration is a very special occasion, and I would have enjoyed showing you around the city of Hamburg. But on the other hand, a virtual launch seems very fitting given the core ambitions of this project, namely to connect people through digital solutions. Among this audience, I do not need to speak about the potential or even the necessity of using data and technical solutions. There are countless examples showing the importance of embracing the opportunities that arise from utilizing data-driven processes. UNITAC focuses on the potential of these technical opportunities in order to contribute to sustainable urban development. But what is more, UNITAC does not limit itself to one of this century's megatrends. Its particular focus is on urbanization, on making cities better, sustainable places to live. You know that the world is urbanizing very quickly. Actually, more than half of the world's population live in cities, and that share is expected to rise up to 60% by 2030. Urbanization is part of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. SDG Goal 11 stands for making cities inclusive, making cities safe, resilient, and sustainable. Our common 2030 Agenda presents a blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future for all of us. Considering that 95% of the urban expansion in the next decades will take place in the developing world, it makes a lot of sense that UNITAC will not focus on Hamburg, Germany, or Europe alone. It has to operate instead in a much broader and a global framework. Ladies and gentlemen, the unique structure of UNITAC represents this global perspective itself and is the result of an excellent cooperation between UN-Habitat, UN Office of Information and Communication Technology, the City of Hamburg, of course, HafenCity University Hamburg, and the German federal government. I would like to thank all of our partners for their efforts made in order to launch UNITAC-Hamburg. The German Federal Foreign Office attaches great importance to the issues that UNITAC has set out to tackle. This is why we support this technology accelerator with a total of 6 million euros. And please be assured that we also stand ready to support UNITAC with our global network and expertise. Cities and local stakeholders are central actors for global sustainable development. The term urban diplomacy stands for the recognition of this fact. Urban diplomacy acknowledges the importance of including the local level into global policy strategies. In cities and communities, we will determine whether and how we will be able to live up to global challenges. The Federal Foreign Office is deeply convinced that foreign policy can only be successful when it is inclusive and when it is transparent. This is why we always want to ensure that the various local level stakeholders are involved in the processes of the United Nations. This applies to existing mechanisms such as the International Mayors Forum, the settlement program of the United Nations UN-Habitat, or the participation in the multilateral processes for sustainability by the so-called Mayor Group of cities and municipalities. This inauguration meeting takes place, ladies and gentlemen, at a crucial time. We find ourselves confronted with two very serious and truly global crises, both with long-term effects. The COVID-19 pandemic is unfortunately far from being over. It has even forced us to hold this event in a purely virtual form. And climate change keeps accelerating at a dangerous speed. These crises are interlinked in many respects, and they also have something very important in common. While action needs to be taken at local, regional, national, global level, we are dealing with global crises that won't spare any country, any region, and any city. These are crises that no country, no region, or no city can tackle alone. We need international solidarity, multilateral and multi-level cooperation, and strong international institutions. The United Nations Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities in Hamburg is a visible sign of international solidarity and our commitment to multilateralism. We want, therefore, UNITAC to be a hands-on example of why and how multilateralism delivers better, faster, and more sustainability than if we all just look after ourselves. In this spirit, you can be assured of my government's wholehearted support, and it is in this spirit that I wish you every success. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your visionary and encouraging words, Mr. Annen. We will now hear from Mr. Victor Kissop, Deputy Executive Director at UN-Habitat. It is a pleasure to have you among us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Mr. Annen, Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, Mr. Patrick Carey, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Office of Information and Communications Technology, Chancellor Egeland of HafenCity Universities, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. Regrettably, we cannot meet physically in Hamburg to celebrate this important occasion together, but we're delighted to meet virtually and jointly launch the United Nations Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities, UNITAC. I would particularly like to thank the implementing partners, UN-OICT and HafenCity University, as well as the generous donation that we have received from the German government for enabling this initiative. Furthermore, I would like to thank all participants for attending and learning more about UNITAC and its plan in the next few years. I am sure that amongst all of you, we have many future partners of this exciting endeavor, and your contributions will be crucial in making it a success. This initiative is very timely for UN-Habitat, which has over the years developed a solid portfolio in the areas of smart cities, digital technologies, data governance, and urban innovation. What is in this portfolio of UN-Habitat? Well, UN-Habitat has designed smart city master plans, for example, in Kigali, Rwanda. We have developed virtual reality projects to improve public space usage for all communities. And for example, in Johannesburg, we've applied Minecraft in urban design in Addis Ababa, in Wuhan, and in Ulaanbaatar. We have supported cities in Afghanistan to develop a land registry through blockchain. Our expertise is wide-ranging, and we have experience in producing data on cities related to population size, geographical expansion, city coverage globally, and sector-specific. We have a mandate to work with member states on technical support programs, and we collaborate with a great variety of stakeholders, communities, businesses, NGOs, etc., to improve the quality of life as well as provide better services in cities. UN-Habitat will fully leverage its coordination role on sustainable urbanization within the United Nations system. It has a presence in nearly 100 countries and partnerships with governments at various levels around the world to make this a success. The partnership will be an excellent showcase of innovation and the use of digital technologies for SDG achievement. It contributes to the implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap on digital transformation, as well as UN-Habitat's current strategic plan. UNITAC will foster an expanded deployment of people-centered technologies and innovations for sustainable urban development. UNITAC will promote transparency and understanding of technological innovation in urban planning and policymaking. UNITAC will engage member states, citizens, and other stakeholders in the development of innovative urban solutions. Without the engagement of all groups, particularly vulnerable groups, the project will not thrive, as the outcomes of the project as well as the pilot activities are designed to benefit all people equitably, thus leaving no one behind. In short, UNITAC will comprise urbanization, technology, data science, and innovation experts that can identify, develop, and implement applied research projects at the intersection of urbanization, innovation, and technology. It will develop urban technology and innovation methodologies that can be used to analyze urban challenges and trends and develop scenarios, prototypes, and solutions that demonstrate the power of digital technologies to solve urban challenges. The solutions will be tested and scaled through UN-Habitat's global network of local governments and other partners. UNITAC's methodology will be based around the following three themes: open, transparent, and participatory governance of data and digital platforms, mapping spatial analysis and visualization, people-centered smart cities. UN-Habitat stands ready to implement this exciting program in Hamburg with the requisite supervision from its headquarters in Nairobi. I thank you all very much.
Thank you for your very stimulating remarks, Victor. Next, Mr. Patrick Carey, United Nations Acting Assistant Secretary General for ICT, will share his opening remarks with us. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Minister Aman, and also Victor. I'm very happy to be here today for this virtual launch of UNITAC. I wish, as the Minister of State said, we were celebrating this in person, but I think it does illustrate, as you indicated, the increasing realization we all have had over the last year on our dependence on ICT to connect, to communicate and collaborate, and also to solve problems. And I think what we're launching today is another reflection of that. Firstly, I'd like to express my deep appreciation to the Federal Foreign Office of the Federal Government of Germany for its strong support and commitment, without which this launch would not have been possible. UNITAC-Hamburg is a precursor in advancing the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. It is an example of the type of innovative partnership and collaboration among all relevant stakeholders within the UN system, with academia, and with the private sector that is necessary to support implementation of the SDGs, and in this case, the new urban agenda. OICT's involvement and support to UN-Habitat and to this project in general reflects our own mandate to support mandate delivery by UN entities globally. Innovation as an enabler will play a critical role in moving the goals and mandates of the UN forward, and in this regard, engaging with partners is paramount to the success of ensuring that technology supports the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. OICT's roles in UNITAC therefore also reflects our goal to identify and promote the use of emerging technologies to advance the mandate of the United Nations, as well as providing frameworks for the responsible use of technology and data. With over 2/3 of the world's population expected to live in cities by 2050, technology innovation will be central to addressing some of the most pressing challenges facing our cities. In this regard, our goal within UNITAC is to help it develop and deploy people-centered technologies and innovations for sustainable urban development. In conclusion, I'd like to reaffirm OICT's strong commitment to the project and to UNITAC, and to stress our support that will be forthcoming to help us realize the full potential of new emerging technologies for tackling sustainable urbanization challenges. Finally, I'd like to thank the core team who has ably steered the project to this stage and to set up the accelerator, including colleagues in UN-Habitat and in HafenCity University. I'm confident that with our combined joint efforts, UNITAC will successfully deliver on its objectives in the forthcoming years, and in so doing, can become a model for similar initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you for your supporting message, Patrick. And I have now the pleasure to welcome Ms. Stephanie Egerland, Chancellor of HafenCity University. We're grateful to have you as one of our speakers. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear Sarah Minister Annen, dear First Mayor of the City of Hamburg, Mr. Chencher, dear Mr. Kisop, dear Mr. Carey, Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the HafenCity University Hamburg, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of UNITAC-Hamburg. It is a great honor for HCU to be a part of this exciting cooperation. HCU is a small university with about 2,400 students and with a very specialized focus, the built environment. HCU is an interdisciplinary oriented university. Every day, our researchers and students focus on the city and all its facets like architecture, urban planning, engineering, structural, social, and on the ecological basis. As a bonus for all of us, we are located as a university directly in the city. HCU is located in one of the most dynamic metropolitan regions in Europe, and it is an important element, one of the largest and most ambitious urban development projects we have in city here in Hamburg. We call it as our own urban laboratory on one's own doorstep. Also, the university is a comparatively young university founded in 2006, and HCU has been able to contribute in expertise and experience in the field of digital city, citizen engagement, computational sciences, simulation, visualization, and interfaces. Since 2015, HCU and the MIT Media Lab in Boston, Massachusetts, have been running a joint research project, the UNITAC Science Lab, which serves as a research unit in the field of cities and regions in the digital age. As a part of this cooperation, the so-called cityscapes were brought to Hamburg for the first time, which were then initially further developed for the Finding Places project. Many other research projects have since resulted from this initiative. Since the beginning of the cooperation, HCU has received various inquiries from different interesting groups in connection with our research work on digital cities. Depending on the focus of interest, HCU researchers present projects in the field of digital city several times a month for large groups of people, but not in the Corona time, but before and I hope afterwards also. Media interest in the project is also high. Through these initiatives, UN has also become aware of our work. We are very grateful that Hamburg and the HCU can bring their experience to support the missions and goals of UNITAC-Hamburg. Today, our cities are facing many of the same challenges every day. Therefore, it is important for us to exchange experiences and ideas in the field of built environment and urban development. We are very excited to learn from other cities and at the same time give them the opportunity to benefit from our experiences and our tools. At the moment, urban development research is very strong because cities are getting bigger. For the HCU, interdisciplinary metropolitan research and sustainability are important focus areas. So with UNITAC, we will pursue SDG 11, so it fits very well. Characteristic for Hamburg is a strong political will to involve research and universities to develop a smart city focused on people. The idea is to use Hamburg as a testbed, as many of our projects are implemented here in Hamburg. For example, Urban Data Hub or social infrastructure mapping. Hamburg has very strong local cooperation partners such as foundations, authorities, companies, or NGOs. With UNITAC-Hamburg, we have the opportunity to develop these projects with new partners in other cities and countries around the world. It is interesting that this is a cooperation between the UN and the university, as the university probably more experimental and free engine of innovation, more neutral. So we will see. It is important to build international research partnerships for the future with universities in the global south. With the launch of UNITAC, we all have an exciting but also busy month ahead of us. In summer 21, we will open the Digital City Competence Center in the Alpha Garden close to us in HafenCity, some minutes walk from our main building. Also, UNITAC-Hamburg will be located there. We are very excited about the interesting and innovative projects and are very pleased that this cooperation has been established. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the members of UN as well as supporters in Germany for making this cooperation possible. On behalf of the HCU, I would like to express my special thanks to the German Foreign Office in Berlin for funding UNITAC. And I also and especially would like to thank Mr. Hans-Christian Mangelsdorf from the German Foreign Office and Mr. Kamal Amarkan from UN for their support and for the constructive contributions during the negotiations of contracts and budgets between the Foreign Office in Berlin, the UN, and HCU, so that all agreements could be finalized and signed. I would also like to thank all the HCU scientists, including Mrs. Sila involved, for their great engagement. We are very much looking forward to the interesting and exciting projects to exchange and develop ideas and innovation. We are grateful that HafenCity University and our researchers can be a part of them. We are ready for it and can't wait for the first joint activities and projects to start. I wish you all a successful cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insightful remarks, Ms. Egerland. And I thank again all of speakers for their opening remarks. We will now hear the welcome address from Dr. Peter Tschentscher, first mayor of the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg. Dr. Tschentscher wasn't able to join us today in person, and is sharing his message in the following pre-recorded address.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2015, the United Nations adopted the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. The global community is committed to preserve the natural foundations of life and to ensure a humane, dignified, and healthy standard of living worldwide. In order to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the world's major cities bear a unique responsibility. Because it is the cities that have the economic power and the expertise in science and technological development to set these transformation processes in motion. UNITAC-Hamburg at HafenCity University will address fundamental issues of digital change in urban areas, focusing on participation, transparency, and creative spaces for citizens. The results from this pilot project can help cities around the world become more sustainable. The Hamburg City Science Lab at HafenCity University, in cooperation with MIT in the United States, has been conducting very successful research on the future and sustainability of cities. UNITAC is a great addition to this work and allows for further collaborations with international partners. Following the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, UNITAC is the third United Nations institution to be established in Hamburg. I would like to thank the representatives of the United Nations, the German Federal Foreign Office, and everybody who helped to establish UNITAC-Hamburg. Dear Professor Ziemer, dear Ms. Schäfer, dear Mr. Ibach, I wish you great success leading the first UNITAC in Hamburg.
We thank Dr. Tschentscher for his warm welcome. It is now my honor to introduce Professor Edgar Peterse, Director of the American Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town. Professor Peterse will provide his keynote address on urban digital governance and smart cities in Africa. It is a great pleasure to have you among us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, the moderator, and colleagues, all protocols observed. I'd like to use the share screen function to share PowerPoint, but I don't see that option live. I can maybe ask Isabel to share the PowerPoint from her side.
You have the option, sir. You can do it now.
The button is still faded out. So I think there's a problem in the system preferences, and I'd have to reboot the whole thing. So yeah, my apologies.
Okay, we'll let Amanda do it.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, colleagues. I've got very little time and I've got quite a lot of ground to cover, so it's just easier to have some visual representation. Thank you. Okay. yeah, I'm not sure when the PowerPoint will come on. Okay, allow me then just to start. So the first point really that I want to make is that we, of course, in a very particular zeitgeist. And I think that what we know is that 2020, the crisis of the pandemic, coincided, of course, with two very important social processes that originated in different parts of the world, but very quickly had a universal appeal and resonance. Can we just go to the second slide, please? So we're on the last slide now. I'm kind of giving the punchline away. Thanks. The second slide, please. Thank you. Thanks. And so the climate justice movement, the Black Lives Matter movement resonated globally and reminded us, of course, that as the SDGs suggest, that at the core of the civilizational transformation that we are all busy with to transition to a sustainable, just, and more inclusive world is the question of inequality. One of the SDGs, and I guess an SDG we have to read in conjunction with SDG 5, which of course is gender equality. However, the reality that we've seen as vaccine became available, next part of the slide, please, is that despite all of the rhetoric that we've seen around the world in terms of inclusivity, that this is a global phenomenon and so forth, that vaccine inequality still dominates the response at a global scale. And so, of course, we've noticed that access to the vaccine and how that has been allocated, despite all of the rhetoric, continues to follow the fault lines that, of course, are at the heart of why we have the SDG Compact in the first place. Next slide, please. So I want to just reference that point because, of course, it is something that the United Nations itself has recognized in the Secretary General's report of last year, where we are reminded that the world remains incredibly divided, manifested by stark digital inequalities. In 2019, the report reads, close to 87% of individuals in developed countries use the internet, compared to only 19% in the least developed countries. And of course, as we've heard in the opening remarks, that it is precisely in those societies that the bulk of urbanization will occur over the next 30 years. So this then raises the question, when we talk about smart cities and its potential catalytic role, should we perhaps add into the mix the idea of a restorative justice project? A restorative justice project that acknowledges the underpinning of slavery to the project of globalization today, that acknowledges the political and social underpinnings to the climate crisis that we confront today. And so can we please insist and ensure that as we embrace the potentialities of digital transformations and platforms as enablements, that this gets done in a way that is historically aware and alive and is really able to deploy these technologies in a way that will break down these particular barriers that we face. Next slide, please. So what I want to focus on is to suggest that if we're serious about this kind of deployment of technology to the urban condition, we have to think systemically. And if we can go to the next slide, please. The SDGs, of course, provide a fantastic example of how to think systemically. And next slide, please. And what I've tried to do, sorry, there's some technical problems with the PowerPoint. Just one slide back, please. What I've tried to do is to demonstrate how the urban goal sits at the practice nexus of the climate agenda, which the 1.5 report, of course, has explained to us as fundamentally an infrastructural built environment agenda, and that figuring out what that means in economic terms is precisely what is at the heart of the innovation agenda that needs to be pursued. And this is the only way that we will get to a different kind of economic model that delivers decent work and inclusive economic growth. Of course, what has to trigger that, what has to facilitate that, is profound societal cultural transformation so that we can, in fact, get different production and consumption patterns in our societies to generate the demand. If we then translate that in the next slide to what this means for the substance of Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, we recognize that there are a number of governance, institutional, planning, and land use transformations that has to happen simultaneously and with enormous urgency. Just on the infrastructure side, we need to transition to sustainable infrastructure systems, which in of itself is a massive undertaking given the retrofit that implies in the European, North American context. And of course, the new build that it applies in the parts of the world where we are going to see this massive urban expansion. This agenda between infrastructure and the built environment relies on innovations in planning, zoning, and regulatory reform. And that in turn demands a fundamentally new paradigm of property and understanding property and ecosystem services as fundamentally interlinked and interlocked. So for us now, we've got to recognize that the status quo does not do this at the moment. And so we're talking about a dramatic institutional, political, and societal revolution in order to achieve the fundamentals of the SDGs. That can't be done outside of coalitions. And I guess the fantastic opportunity we have here is that this can be enabled through digital platforms. And they can serve as catalysts, next slide please, for all of these very complex transitions that has to be made. So UNITAC can't be more opportune in terms of its timing and in terms of its potential research focus. I guess my call today in this keynote address is that we have to ensure that this is not a technocratically driven initiative, but rather something that understands the mandate of societal transformation as set out in the SDGs. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we have some fantastic thinking that has come together over the last couple of years, trying to formulate what this global agenda means. There's, of course, the report, the roadmap report of the Secretary General, but there's also the Pathways to Prosperity Commission that developed this fascinating attempt between the private sector and think tanks and universities and the state about what a digital roadmap could entail that really tries to understand what the economic multiplier effects might be and how does one address the mandate of digital citizenship and digital human rights within this framework. Next slide, please. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make by referencing those reports is that there's a reasonably coherent understanding at the moment about what this agenda might mean. However, the devil will be in the detail of translation. And so I want to, from an African perspective, just reflect very, very briefly on what some of the governance dynamics and challenges might be. Next slide, please. So given the complexity of political reform, the introduction of multi-party democracy, the systemic underinvestment in local government, it's important to stare our political economy in the face. And these are some of the high-level sort of descriptions that I would offer of what we are confronted with in most urban contexts across the African continent. Typically elite capture, which limits public resource investments. And this tends to then produce an urban form that reproduces inequality. Civil society is often fragmented. Public discourse is highly fractured. And so it's hard to really focus on the critical priorities confronting our cities and countries. Thirdly, very low level of state capability, especially in relation to the complexities of integrated and holistic development and urban management. Fourthly, we've now seen for at least the last 2 decades, just stubbornly stalled democratic decentralization. And clearly, if we are unable to empower city governments, we have very little hope of mainstreaming the kind of innovations that UNITAC will be focused on. And finally, outdated regulatory frameworks, especially regarding digital human rights and digital governance. This, of course, is not unique to Africa, but just to underscore that this is particularly acute in the African context. Next slide, please. So moving on from this diagnostic, I want to just, I guess, inject a bit of hope in that even in contexts where there is an extreme version of some of those characteristics, such as the city of Port Harcourt in Nigeria, we've seen grassroots organizations seize upon the potentialities of these innovations. This is a very brief example of how a movement called CMAP in Port Harcourt used its mechanisms and resources to activate young people in the slum communities, in the waterfront slum communities, to enumerate their communities, to tell a different narrative and story, and speak into the governance and development vacuum that exists there. Next slide, please. These are just examples of how these young people were mobilized through Chikoko Maps, which is what they call their projects as part of a larger suite. Next slide, please. Through training, through learning how to use very simple analog mechanisms and so on, they were able to produce these alternative representations. Next slide, please. This is just examples of these. Next slide, please. And as you can see, they are able to use these very simple digital tools to provide an alternative representation. Next slide, please. And what that does is, of course, fundamentally transform the power relation in that city. There are other examples of how we can see these digital platforms connected with circular economy principles can begin to reanimate how we think of various service delivery sectors. This is an example from work of the Toilet Board Coalition on the sanitation economy and how we can empower communities to transform their neighborhoods by taking control of these infrastructures, but also do it in a way that has a number of multiplier effects. And this is exactly the kind of innovations that I think we can begin to see substantiated through the enabling work of UNITAC. Next slide, please. What these principles suggest, just move on. What these principles suggest is that we can rethink every single infrastructural sector within our cities. Taking the principles of solidarity or the care economy and the circular economy and how digital platforms and open protocols can enable that, we can see a revolution in the fortunes and in the prospects and the basis of citizenship if we apply this. So I don't want to overwhelm the agenda of UNITAC, but I just want to underscore that the potentiality is enormous and the potential impact of demonstrating practically how these transitions can be effected is a wide open field. Next slide, please. So in conclusion then, I want to suggest that we have to understand that HafenCity is a fantastic platform to kick this off, but we will have to replicate similar kinds of innovation capacities with transdisciplinary expertise across cities and urban systems, particularly in the geographies that need it most. And different kinds of research capabilities will have to come together. And then finally, I guess from all of this, next slide, please, the challenge that I want to leave you with is that there is a real imperative to ensure that the systemic investment in particularly dealing with the institutional failures that we see crippling cities across the global south. And I guess my plea in the final instance in supporting and celebrating this important initiative is that this is not about the technology, but it is about everything else, the soft infrastructures that enable the kind of empowered citizenship that sits at the core of the SDG agenda for that to become a material and a lived reality. I thank you for your attention, and I want to congratulate all the partners on this incredibly important and potential rich initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Peterson, for your very comprehensive and stimulating address. Next in our program, a panel of distinguished guests will discuss how to position UNITAC as a key leader for digital cooperation and people-centered smart cities. It is with great pleasure that I'm introducing our panelists. Ms. Christine Knudsen, Director of External Relations, Strategic Planning, Knowledge and Innovation at the UN-Habitat, Professor Gesa Ziemer, Director of the City Science Lab at HafenCity University, Ms. Yu-Ping Chan, Senior Program Officer in the Office of the United Nations Envoy on Technology, and Mr. Salim Awan, Director of the Policy, Strategy and Governance Division in the United Nations Office of Information and Communications Technology. We cannot think of a group more qualified to share with us their thoughts into how they view UNITAC's profile and position. Thank you all for being here with us. Christine, what do you see as the need for the establishment of UNITAC? What needs, demands, and problems is UNITAC seeking to respond to? Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I hope that you're able now to see me. Yes, there we are. Greetings to all. I've been struggling a little bit with my camera, but it seems to be working now, and sending you all greetings from Nairobi. It's a large stuff, of course, but this is a bit of a historic moment, and I have to say that I wanted to voice sincere appreciation of our keynote and the challenge that has been so clearly articulated as to how we will use these initiatives, this investment, this opportunity to be catalytic, to enable that systemic investment and address institutional failure. And if I could just step back from that a moment and say as well, as the Chancellor has mentioned, our Director, other speakers, that we are looking at this from multiple challenges. That I think if we start from this point, it is not about technocratic approaches, it is not about technological approaches, and it's not about technology for technology's sake. And that our challenge is not simply around digital transformation, but societal transformation. And that is the challenge that sits before all of us. We're not simply trying to solve a problem of code or technology, but really, how are we going to use these tools to achieve sustainable change with people at the center? And I think that is the real key defining element here, is the people-centered approaches that we are seeking to develop, to enable, to multiply, and to leverage globally. So what will this digital transformation mean for people? I think this has already been mentioned around the coalitions that may be given form, that the digital divide that we have seen so clearly thrown into relief through the COVID and the pandemic response. How will we be addressing this in a systematic way across the United Nations and our partners and stakeholders? The challenge is going to be quite significant. And I think the other component of this is, how are we going to measure our progress? Through what metrics? How are we going to enable this change and this transformation? And then perhaps finally, how do we accelerate that? And these are some of the questions that we have been asking ourselves as we have been exploring these opportunities, as well as looking at this from a regional perspective, noting, as our keynote speaker has, in the African context, the situation may be quite distinct, and we have to recognize regional and sub-regional variations around this digital transformation, learning, and enabling environment. Now, we've already been trying to set some of this tone as UN-Habitat. We've been developing our own documents to accompany this journey, and looking at how we develop a new work package in our own strategic plan, which will run through 2023. For the first time, we have a very clear focus on our institutional positioning, our restructuring around innovation and digital technologies. This is a key part of our global work program, and as such, we are contributing this with UNITAC to the service of this project and sustainable development overall. The people-centered technologies, innovations for sustainable urban development in support of the 2030 agenda. This is really at the heart of UNITAC and the driving force of why we have partnered, I think, with all of you in this important work. The other component, as I have already mentioned, perhaps, is that we want to ensure that this technology, this power, this transformation is put to the service of people and communities, and ensuring that those components are well maintained overall. You know, I think it may be also quite important to think about how we will be positioning ourselves as UN-Habitat and some of the assets that we bring to this partnership and to this important work, and how we are developing a platform here to ensure that knowledge exchange and transfer is a complete integrated part of our work. That means that we will be bringing our regional and country presence into this context, that we will be able to leverage with many of our partners, governments and communities, as well as local communities themselves, how we are adapting solutions into those contexts, and how we will be able to deliver that learning, that knowledge, that compiled normative work, advice and services in a much more targeted and adaptive way. This is a way that we bring the global learning guidance and normative frameworks into ground realities and vice versa, so that ground realities are in fact informing that global debate and dialogue. I think if we look at with all of us on this journey. The value that we're trying to also mobilize as UN-Habitat is that of our specific mandate within the UN system, and looking at how we are going to be leveraging this role for sustainable urban development as was mentioned at the nexus of achieving the 2030 goals. How are we going to leverage the entire UN system with our partnerships, as well as our own urban expertise in these cross-cutting themes around equitable development, social inclusion, digital rights, public participation, spatial mapping, and people-centered smart cities. We bring to this our convening power, and we really do want to put this to the service of this project and this program of work, the convening power that we are able to bring with our presence in 100 countries worldwide, partnerships with local governments, as well as with member states. It is a unique nexus of influence that we find that we can convene not only communities themselves, the global experts, as well as member states in this conversation and in the learning and the approaches which will emerge. We will look forward to this work together. I think that this is an exciting moment, not only because of where we are starting, but where we see ourselves going together, hand in hand, across this very powerful partnership. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. With HafenCity University as a partner in UNITAC, how do you envision the role of academia in contributing to the practical solutions that will be developed in UNITAC?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Michael. Hello, everyone from Hamburg. I'm very happy also to be part of it. Thank you very much to all of the previous speakers. I'm happy to see you at least virtually. Yeah, I'm very glad that research will be a strong part of UNITAC. So the whole project is a cooperation with the university. And I think we can all say in general as researchers that the whole topic of digital cities / smart cities are very strong research topics worldwide at the moment in Europe, but also in all the other continents and countries. Cities have become big data producers. Meanwhile, there is a lot of technology around and available for cities. But the most important question is, of course, how do people use technology? How can technology help people live a better life? And I think our expertise is really a lot in the City Science Lab that I'm heading, that we are really working at this interface between technology and society. So all those crucial humanitarian questions, they are also research questions too. Research is needed because of having the freedom a little more of experimenting, maybe also of fostering innovation. But when I speak of innovation, I don't speak so much about tech innovation. I speak more about, and I really want to underline this, formats of collaboration and co-designing future city scenarios. So I think social transformation, social innovation is very, very important when we speak about this whole field of smart cities. And we all know that there is this digital divide, and this is also in Europe the case, not only in other countries. And we have to try to prevent this. And we all know that successful projects are based on trust, on long-term thinking, and working together equally. And I would be very delighted also if UNITAC could give us the opportunity maybe to set up joint graduate schools or joint research projects. I didn't speak to Edgar Peters about this, but I would really love to continue this dialogue also with you, Edgar. It would be great maybe to have a common PhD programs or something like that, so that we can learn from your research culture and you can learn from our research culture. We don't do research in a bubble here, in an academic bubble. We really try to contribute with ideas, alternatives, and hopefully a lot of creativity.
Thank you, Gesa. Several speakers have referred to the role of technology. Salim, what are the latest technology innovations that the UN Office of Information and Communication Technology is seeing in the field of development cooperation? And how could these be relevant for UNITAC? Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for all of the speakers, all of the contributors. I think that for some of us, this has been quite a long journey to get to this point, and we're very proud that we have this the center, initiating and starting, and very grateful for the support we've received and the collaboration and cooperation we've received. It's interesting when we think about technology and the use and kind of importance of technology. I've heard a couple of speakers talk about how technology isn't really the solution, and I completely agree with that. Technology in an isolated sense is absolutely not the solution, but I think it's an important contributor to this larger kind of coordinated ecosystem of effort. So with legislation, with governance, with advocacy, with policy, with collaboration, cooperation, if you're able to add a meaningful, smart, effective technology that really is geared to and supportive of the objectives that we establish, then of course it can be very, very useful. I will say one thing before I talk about technology. What's really kind of important about this particular center and the partnership we have, not only with our colleagues in Habitat, but also with academia, the university, the kind of broader network that was alluded to, is this. I don't believe and have never believed that the problems that we're trying to tackle will or really should be solved by the United Nations as a single organizational entity. I've always felt that these sorts of challenges and problems are collective responsibility, where we can help move that forward. We can engage with member states, we can engage on legislative issues, we can try to bring some convening power, etc. But it's a joint and collaborative effort between ourselves at the UN and partners, like academic institutions, private sector, public sector, governments, etc. And I think that's why this is really important, because it's a really, really important and good blend of that. So I think that's a critical thing for us to remember. And I see in the chat there's a lot of engaged people and participants. And I think that I kind of want to say to everybody that our efforts, whether you're a technology person, legislative kind of a person, a policy person, academic, as long as they're geared in the same direction, and as long as we bear in mind the Sustainable Development Goals, the objectives that our respective member states have really kind of established globally and agreed to, and as long as we work together, as Gesa mentioned, in a very kind of collaborative sense, we can really start moving, our cities forward to overcome some of the issues and challenges. If I could talk about a little bit about the technology, we have a particular role and are very proud to be partners in this activity. So first of all, of course, we understand technology well, but importantly, we don't have any particular perspective. We have no particular interest in one technology versus another, or one vendor, one product, one anything. What we're able to do is really engage in a very impartial and kind of objective way. We're also able to try and deal with some of the buzzwords and some of the kind of, I guess, the different kind of fads that surround this area of technology and data. So we're able to really kind of understand whether we should apply technology, what technology we should apply, and very critically, how we should blend those technologies together. I think that almost everybody on this, the participants will have heard of artificial intelligence and machine learning and quantum computing and distributed ledger and blockchain and all those things, mixed reality, etc. when we think about those technologies, they're all in and of themselves complex. And I think that the perspective that we have is that we can establish capability in those technologies so that as the particular needs, policies, legislation, etc., appears, once we kind of define the projects and the programs and the activities, then we can take the technologies to really support those activities in a very kind of effective way. In general terms, I think the two or three things that we really want to kind of focus on from a technology perspective are really this whole idea of knowledge graphs, a kind of knowledge fabric, being able to utilize artificial intelligence and data from different sources to be able to make sense, to move cities from much more kind of a prescriptive approach to a kind of descriptive approach where you actually have a lot of data feeding in and supporting decision making, etc. You have evidence and data-based solutions. We think there's massive scope and potential for mixed reality, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality. Those sorts of opportunities certainly exist. IoT is, of course, Internet of Things, very, very important. And these are things that will be critical to us, collectively as we go forward. But again, just to reiterate the point that was made by others and that I would like to just endorse, those technologies cannot be implemented and should not be implemented unless there's a clear kind of purpose and use and role for them. Just two last things to say about kind of technology broadly. The first thing is that when we start talking about these sorts of approaches and smart cities, we have to be very, very careful about issues of privacy, cybersecurity, etc. Particularly, we have to understand that, just as we move to a kind of more smart environment in cities, there are those member states that are very mature in this area and therefore able to mitigate some of the potential negative issues or risks arising from technology use. But there are other member states that are very embryonic in their use of technology and therefore aren't necessarily as able to mitigate some of those potential risks and in effect expose themselves to greater risk and greater potential for harm. So that's something we need to be very, very careful about. And then something that's very important to me, we heard about this idea of urbanization and the increase in urbanization, etc. I think we also need to find a way to be able to use technology to really engage and ensure nature has its place as well, and that we're not eroding or damaging the environment around us. And I don't mean the environment, in a macro sense of, pollution, etc. I just mean the environment in terms of how we interact with each other in cities and what role and place nature has to play in that. And I know that that's not typically seen as the kind of main area of technology, but I think that's something that we should really consider. And we've certainly been looking at all sorts of technologies that support those kinds of areas and work. So, Michael, I hope that was a kind of just a general kind of perspective on where we are in technology. I don't want to talk too much about specific tech, but this is just, my thinking in terms of how we should move forward collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salim, and also drawing this kind of picture of the transformative nature that technology can play. Yuping, given that the Secretary General of the United Nations has declared digital transformation a priority, what opportunities do you see for UNITAC to respond to some of these priorities immediately? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and much thanks to the organizers for inviting the Office of the Technology Envoy to be here at this very important launch. Congratulations on what seems like an extremely exciting initiative, and we really look forward to collaborating with you. I think I want to start with something that the Secretary General has repeatedly emphasized, and it has been mentioned by a number of speakers as well, the fact that the Leave No One Behind part of the Sustainable Development Goals, this question of inequality and inclusion really lies at the heart of what the United Nations is trying to achieve. And you'll see in recent statements by the Secretary General that he has emphasized how digital technologies is both an equalizer as well as an enabler, and that in some ways, addressing how we can best harness the use of digital technologies to achieve the SDGs and leave no one behind is at the heart of the UN's mandate. And this issue of the digital divide then becomes core and paramount to the work that we're doing. So for instance, we completely agree with all the potential that digital technologies has to offer. I think a lot of speakers have covered this in abundance. But what Dr. Peters has said, that really this fundamental question of inequality and leaving no one behind really also has to underpin the work that we do to bring technology and to realize the benefits of technology. So for instance, in the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen how those who are left behind by digital technologies are really the ones that we need to focus our efforts on. And that really in this work that UNITAC is building for the benefit of the world, the global community, and the achievement of SDGs should also really look at this question of those who are left out by the benefits of technology. The fact that, for instance, even as we connect now virtually online and can continue our work and really look forward to collaborating further, there are 3.7 billion people that do not have access to broadband internet and are not connected to the wonders of digital technology that's available online. That these 3.7 billion people, which represent almost half the world's population, cannot benefit from this type of technology. And that even in those that remain unconnected, there are also disparities by which, for instance, women are 17% less likely than men to use the internet. That a lot of the underserved communities are the ones that suffer the most in terms of access. Christine mentioned, for instance, those that live in the slum community. We could also add other vulnerable and marginalized groups, such as people on the move, migrants and refugees, minorities, the young, the elderly, all of which the digital inequality is then heaped on top of discrimination and other inequalities that they might face socially. So this issue, I think, of the digital divide is something that I think UNITAC might be able to address in some of the work that it's doing going forward. I would also say some of the elements that Salim just mentioned, that even as we push to bring people online, to connect more and achieve the Secretary General's goal of universal connectivity by 2030 in terms of meaningful and affordable internet connectivity for all those around the world, we really also have to be mindful of the risk and vulnerabilities that this brings. So for instance, the fact that there are dangers to those, the young and the vulnerable, the children that might face potential exploitation online, that there are vulnerabilities in IT systems and so forth that might actually confront developing countries that don't have the resources of developed countries. There is, I think, this need to really look into the question of how we can best harness technology while mitigating its challenges and risk. I think that is the context in which the Secretary General put forward his roadmap for digital cooperation, that many other speakers have emphasized how UNITAC can really contribute to the implementation of the roadmap in achieving these priority goals of universal connectivity, digital inclusion, digital human rights, while addressing questions of digital trust and security and digital rights online. So I think this idea of how UNITAC can then contribute to the Secretary General's vision of technology as an equalizer and an enabler, and as part of implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap is really key. And we at the Office of the Technology Envoy, as we work towards implementation and coordination of the Secretary General's roadmap, really look forward to capitalizing on the immense, tremendous potential that UNITAC and UN-Habitat and OICT and all partners represent in this joint effort to make the digital future a more inclusive, a more open, a more free space for all. And so I'd like to pick up on a few strands of the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation and go into some details of how I think perhaps UNITAC could contribute in implementing the roadmap. I see, for instance, great potential in the vision that has been laid out in terms of the people-centered smart cities with regards to achieving universal connectivity and as well as promoting digital inclusion. So addressing precisely what I spoke of before, the digital divide, and ensuring that all marginalized parts of the community are brought forward in our vision of a city where all can benefit from digital technologies. So for instance, in the design of cities, the fact that you consider where best to put Wi-Fi connections, the question of access for people with disabilities, how you build cities in certain ways that are inclusive to all those that wish to participate in the digital economy and the online space. These are important questions, I think, that go to the heart of making digital technology accessible to all, besides just building the basic infrastructure of affordable connectivity and online connections for all. I also think that there is great synergy with the potential of digital public goods, another area that is emphasized in the Secretary General's roadmap. This is the idea of putting forward digital solutions to global challenges, solutions that are open source and openly available, freely available to all those who would choose to use those solutions and scale them up to address questions that might confront cities and constituencies and member governments. And this is why I think some of the elements that UNITAC was talking about, that some of the ideas that have already been discussed by previous speakers could contribute to the idea of solutions put forward or incubated at UNITAC being part of the digital public goods that are an offering to all communities, to other countries to scale up, replicate, and use elsewhere. This, I think, also links to to this fundamental idea that the digital solutions that are produced can then be part of our global effort collectively to aid all in the achievement of the SDGs. I tie this also to this idea that Christine had mentioned, that UN-Habitat could use its global presence around the world, the UN-Habitat's various regional offices and local presences to scale up these solutions, that in your networks and implementation processes with local partners, that could be part of those types of global solutions to global challenges. I'm also very mindful of what Dr. Peterson has said, that it's important that these solutions that we find be replicated in geographies that need them the most. And certainly this is part of the implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap, where we talk about digital capacity building and really meeting these needs that are expressed, for instance, in developing countries with regards to bringing them more online, allowing them to take full advantage of the digital technologies that are on offer and the benefits for the digital economy, for the digital community, for bringing their people online as well. So I think these are the types of global solutions that will be important from a global perspective in terms of supporting global digital capacity building. The last thing I would say, I think, is something that was also brought up by a number of speakers, this question of digital human rights and how in our effort to bring people online, to build these types of digital ecosystems, we must have a focus on ensuring that these structures are robust and are ruled by the same underpinning assumption that human rights that exist offline also exist online as well. And so I do think that a lot of these discussions around digital technology, the use of data, the use of these new technologies must be governed by this human rights respecting approach. And I do think that this is where, again, UNITAC can have a great role in sort of proliferating this type of perspective and approach to these systems. So in summary, I do really look forward to the opportunities and the potential that UNITAC holds for the implementation of the Secretary General's roadmap and realizing the Secretary General's vision of this digital future for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yuping. Moving forward, we receive a number of questions in the chat, of course, and thank you very much for all of you to participate so actively. We try to weave in some of the questions that you asked in our conversation with the panelists. Also, if those questions that we don't have a chance to address now specifically, we might be able to address at a later stage offline. So bear in mind with us as we are a bit mindful of the time. Also to the panelists, if you could kind of rather be mindful that we have maybe another 10 minutes left or so in our conversation, but we will try to cover as much as we can. Christine, the question of support at the local level and sustainability has been raised several times. How can we ensure that UNITAC-Hamburg contributes to achieving sustainable impact at the local level, especially for marginalized cities, communities, and citizens? Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So it's a really good question, and I think that what we need to be looking at is the constellation of the community that we are bringing together to this partnership. I think Yuping has just been very good at that, bringing some of the power and the potential here, bringing together with Geza the ideas around our research agenda and expanding that research community around some of these key issues, so that we can identify obstacles and barriers as well as enablers and multipliers. And then, of course, the very powerful different sorts of adaptive technology that we may be able to bring to this. So I think when we're looking at the power that UNITAC, the potential that UNITAC has, it really is how we harness all of these pieces together. And this was the design, the intentional design behind this approach. So if we're able to look at, I think in some ways, these regional variations, the regional differentiations, both globally, but then even within our areas of intervention. So we know that some of the challenges will be quite distinct between the more affluent areas of an urban population, the more marginalized, people on the move, as well as the peri-urban and rural. And looking at how we consider this from a geographic diversity perspective, as well as the challenges across the infrastructure, will be quite important in the way that we frame the work program going forward. Now, the sustainability side of it will have to be thought out in many different levels. And I did very much like the presentation of Dr. Piotrze, our keynote speaker, in looking at how all of the Sustainable Development Goals are actually being brought together in this nexus, and how we are going to be able to leverage these to fulfill existing and lasting change. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us as we bring together communities, cities themselves, local authorities, urban infrastructure, and the member states. This is going to be quite a challenge, but being able to use the technology platforms for that social change, for that social transformation, as we look forward to the digital transformation, is a challenge that we are all rising to together, and that we will each have our contributions where we will, I am sure, be greater than the sum of these different parts, and actually be able to bring great progress over the next 3 years. I hope that you will be able to hold us to that through the metrics which we are establishing, through the approach and the analysis which we are bringing to this, as well as the inclusive approach, which I think is going to be absolutely critical for any discussion around sustainability.
Thank you so much, Christine. Another point that was raised in the chat as well is this kind of balance between the local focus vis-a-vis the global mandate. And Gesa, from your experience, what added value does the City Science Lab and the city of Hamburg as a testbed with its local innovation ecosystem bring to the work of UNITAC?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for this. The interesting case maybe here is that we already have a lab, a kind of lab here in Hamburg, the City Science Lab. So we know lab structure, we know how to do research in labs, we know how to address different ecosystems, we know how to work with a lot of very, very different stakeholders, from civil society like churches and schools to big foundations and so on and so on. And this is maybe great. And I hope that UNITAC will benefit from our lab experience, from our working culture, from how we set up workflows. And in our case here, we already developed a lot of tools like citizen engagement tools, because we have a kind of fragmented civil society also here in Europe. And I think the most important thing also against political populism is really to set up tools to bring people together, to speak to each other, to bring them into a dialogue. And this is what we actually do every day here. We have mappings for social infrastructure. We also set up toolkits for land use. Edgar Petersen mentioned that a lot of conflicts in countries arise because of land use, of unequal land use. So space finding, location finding is something that is very important for us. And we also have a lot of experience in setting up urban data hubs so that cities can systemize their data and make them accessible for cities. I think this is also something that is worldwide needed at the moment, because cities produce so much data and we have to find good ways of visualizing them, of systemizing them, and then making them accessible for people. So I hope that we, with our experience also in implementing those systems, this is maybe also something that I would like to underline, that I'm quite proud to say that most of our technology really is implemented, so people use it. They run in the city. But this is very nice, and this is also a very important part of our experience. And I also hope that this applies to the other direction. We would really love to learn from all the cities in the world, because I know that they also have a lot of technology, and also from the UN, because I know that also UN and UN-Habitat also invented technological tools. They also use virtual reality, augmented reality to extend our perception of cities, of rooms, of spaces, of public spaces. So I think there's a lot for us to contribute. And maybe this is my last sentence, because I know that time is running out. We defined for UNITAC for now 3 different research focus. First one is participation, citizen engagement. The second one is mapping, so the whole field of counter mapping, minority mapping, which is, as we all know, very political, very important. And the next one is people-centered smart cities. And at the end, I really agree with Christine. It's so much then at the end about the local level. So we have to set up these ecosystems and collaborate with people, and have to find people that we trust and that we like to work with, and also governments who then want our technology and want them to be as part of their democratic way of governing a city or a country.
Thank you so much, Kesa. Obviously, in all this approach, partnerships are the key element. Salim, how do you see the strength of the three implementing partners coming together in this new partnership?
Michael, I'm assuming that I have very little time.
Yes, a couple of minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to be very short. I won't go into the respective organizations and their strengths. I'll remind everybody of this well-known kind of saying, you know, if you go alone, you can go fast. If you go together, you can go far. And we have very far to go. When we talk about things like smart cities, it seems to be very kind of standard language that we use. It's something that I've heard a great deal, but I think we have to stop and really think about how complex, how difficult it is. When we talk about trying to move to a different way of doing things in an urban setting, the challenges are immense. We've already talked about the fact that they involve all sorts of different dimensions, whether it's policy, advocacy, human behavior, environmental. We talked about gender, we talked about vulnerable populations, about leaving nobody behind, and of course about technology, data privacy, all those sorts of things. So I don't really necessarily see, I think that this is a really good partnership of three entities, but I think and hope that over time this will become a really, really strong partnership of more than three entities. You know, I'm very, very glad to have the Special Envoy for Technology's office here, because I think that engages in additional constructive, important partners to the conversation. So I would just, you know, the message from me is really, we have our respective strengths. It is a multidimensional and complex problem. It will take time. The idea of urbanization is vastly different depending on where in the world you go and who you talk to. The level of urbanization and how cities work is very, very different. The needs are very different. So I hope that we go from 3 partners to 30 to 300, and we have contributors of all sorts, and they don't have to be organizational entities. They can be people that are engaged, interested, and want to contribute. So we, hope that this effort will be as much about trying to find solutions that scale, but also from my perspective, and having spent a number of years in the UN, I really hope it's about bringing like-minded people together with a common goal to really work on something that everybody believes is important, and kind of pushing in the same direction. So I'm going to stop there in the interest of time constraints, and hand back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Salim. Yuping, final question for you. What do you find most interesting about UNITAC-Hamburg, and how do you think it can stand out compared to similar initiatives from your experience?
Thank you, Michael, and I too will be brief given the shortness of time. I think what is really interesting about UNITAC-Hamburg is something that Salim mentioned, that it is in some ways a multi-stakeholder partnership that brings together more than just the typical UN agencies. And we in our office have found the value of really engaging with all, having all stakeholders that are relevant to an issue really come together to put their collective brains together to find these types of solutions. So for instance, a partnership between academia, the private sector, civil society organizations on key digital challenges, because the digital space poses conundrums and problems that will not be just for national regulators or governments to solve. It has to be through partnership and engagement with all players to find the best types of solutions that can be practical and effective. So this nature of a multi-stakeholder open partnership is critical to addressing the challenges that we face in digital domain. So that part of the UNITAC project, I think, is critical and very important. And I really hope it will be part of the type of collaboration and digital cooperation that the UN has going forward. In terms of what I also am very intrigued by and looking forward to is this issue of what will be the products of UNITAC-Hamburg's collaboration and project work. So I do really look forward to concrete outcomes, and I commend the focus on having action-oriented outcomes that can then be replicated in other countries and scaled up. Because I mean, too often, and this will be, I'll be quite honest, again, I think that there is a lot of talk and a lot of interest in these issues, but what we need to do is then translate the discussions, the talk into real action, projects, applications, and products that can then be put to the service of the people around the world. So in my view, is really the value of the UNITAC project.
Thank you so much, Ping. And let me just kind of pick one comment from the chat. From a decade of action, we are looking at a decade of transformation. Let's make it happen. I think that sums it up very nicely. And thank you all for your comments and questions. And I wish to express my gratitude to our distinguished panelists, as well as all our speakers, for their extremely valuable and encouraging contributions. As we're closing, I now have the pleasure to hand over to Ms. Katja Schäfer, who is the interim UNITAC lab manager from UN-Habitat, for her closing remarks. Katja, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I see I have very limited time, so I'm very actually enthusiastic, and I think the launch of the UNITAC initiative has been very energetic, and I see also from the comments there are a lot of questions which we will certainly take into consideration when shaping UNITAC. I really would like to highlight here also, UNITAC will contribute as part of the United Nations Innovation Technology Accelerator for Cities to the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the new urban agenda at the very local level. Also in the spirit, as it was mentioned, of the SDGs roadmap on digital cooperation. And we cannot make this happen alone. It was also mentioned it's a multi-stakeholder partnership. In fact, we are trying to address actually some of the elements of the digital divide that was mentioned here today as well, and really find solutions that are based on demand and that place people at the center of those solutions in order to enhance living conditions for people, for all, in fact, as Yu Ping also was highlighting. I would like to also say, in fact, many of us in the team have not met physically, and so also many of us in the launch today have not met physically. But the intention of UNITAC is actually to create impact on the ground, introduce change, and at the end, in fact, help us to upscale to other contexts, to learn lessons and address different contexts. And here, one of the questions was really, how do we do that at local level? I think it's important to really understand how strategies do we need at local and national level to have this multi-stakeholder partnerships to introduce that change. But then also, I think a key question that really roams around our discussion here is the capacity question at local level to really shape inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable urbanization. And I really would like to share with you, in fact, a few faces of the people who are part of the team of UNITAC. Isabel, if you could move to the next slide. So this is just the beginning. We have started to actually assemble the team, which consists of UN-Habitat. I'm a representative of that. Michael, who has been moderating from UNITAC, and Geza as well from the HafenCity University. And then we have a whole range of colleagues that are at technical level, at managerial level, at innovation level, come together to really work that. This picture is not complete. We are still recruiting, and also will shape certain partnerships in the next weeks to come to really find a very inclusive approach to UNITAC. If you could share the next slide, I also would like to just highlight see that establishing to basically provide advisory services to UNITAC as well. And I'm very happy that some of those program management events, we have Victoria as well as Niels Annen from the government of Germany being co-chairs. Salem has also spoken from OICT, Ms. Egerland from the HafenCity University, Julie Key as well, she was in the meeting, and Almut Möller, I saw your comment, thanks for that as well, and wishing us good luck. Edgar Peterson, thanks so much for the stimulating keynote. And I would like to, in fact, with the very last slide, and we will also enter this link into the chat, encourage the participants, which were at a certain point 400 plus, and we still have 300 people in the call, to basically, we are inviting you to propose suggestions, show your interest in joining the wider family of UNITAC, and please feel free to make comments, and we will basically add upcoming events, but also to take action with us in piloting certain initiatives at local level. And here I think there was just to conclude, a comment from Afghanistan asking, are you also working in developing countries? And I would just say, yes, we are. And in fact, we're trying to reach out to the people who are suffering from that digital divide to be fully embraced in inclusive urbanization. And I wish all of you a good remainder of the day here from Nairobi, and we are looking forward as a team to working with all of you and more in this very exciting initiative. Thanks a lot.